Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with, I suppose my thoughts on the New York Comic Con 2018 Avatar and Korra panel. Happened last night, and yeah, let's go over it. So, I think the first thing to say about it is that in general, there was basically no coverage of it. Like, Dark Horse officially didn't do anything. I think there were two people on Twitter who were like kind of covering it. Someone was posting updates every 10 minutes or so. And then another person I think we knew was there, but wasn't so much posting updates. So most of the updates actually came from, obviously, Avatar Online podcast co-host Greg. So all the pictures here come from him. He sent them to me once the panel ended. So major thanks to him for, I suppose, getting this news out in a way, because I suppose without that, I don't think we'd know what happened in the panel. So let's just go through it, and then I'll give my opinions on the panel overall. So, basically, the panelists were Peter Wortman, Sarah Goater, and the usual moderator they have for, all of the panels. So, not the best lineup in terms of, I think getting, brand new information. So, of course, Imbalance is the focus. They lead with that. They tell everyone what date it's coming out on, show the cover, and then, because it's Peter Wortman there, he goes over some of the art stuff with regards to, of course, Brian, and his role in the comics is that he is the art sort of supervisor. He gives the artist on each of the comics sort of feedback as we go through the different stages of the comic being drawn. So you can see here Peter Wortman posting this panel of one of the buildings and Brian giving it the feedback, this is rad, so he likes this. Another one here, more buildings, him saying so cool, and then this is some more, I suppose important feedback here of when you're drawing Toph fighting, make sure you have her specific, fist kind of pose, because she bends in a very specific style, showing the attention to detail and getting that detail that, a new artist, they might be aware that Toph has a unique style, but maybe not that specifically on her fist that she does this. So that's a pretty cool little thing, insight into the art process, and that Brian actually plays a pretty big role in this comic, so that's important to note. They do then show off some preview pages. Now, we get, I think, 5 preview pages here. Again, I don't think these have not yet been released in a way where you can read the text. I know the way I'm showing it here isn't the best to even attempt to read it, but even if you zoom in on it, I've tried, lots of other people have tried, you can only make out a handful of words. Right now, I don't think there are pictures of this to the point where you can read it, and I think it'd be really difficult because obviously it's a projection on a wall. Comic, especially small text, isn't the best to be picked up by people taking pictures of a projected image. So, either way, it looks like it's going to be the first opening couple of pages of Imbalance, of the team coming in to the town of Cranefish, which is obviously related to stuff from the Rift, a little bit from the Promise as well. Basically, Proto-Republic City. And we see them talking. I think sort of stuff you can hear them talking about here is that Aang mentions something about Appa, Toph mentions something about her father. Obviously that's going to be related because her father owns the Earth and Fire refinery, and that's kind of what the town of Cranefish kind of builds up around. So that's kind of interesting. Next page again, it's more talking on the back of Appa. Sokka seems to kind of suggest something, and I think they begin to sort of talk about where they're going and the way it is, how it's built up, and it seems like Aang says something along the lines of, Sokka was right, it is kind of very heavily built up. And so you can see here, that's Republic City. That's basically Republic City. This shot makes it so clear, this page, that there's UA Bay, there's Republic City, there's Air Temple Island. That's it. We're here. We're basically getting towards that point. This is the clearest it's been so far. The Promise brought up the idea of the 4 nations sort of living together. The Rift sort of brought that together in terms of a business sense, and then we're really seeing directly the location being built up. So this is going to be really interesting. How much they go into it, by the end of Imbalance, do we basically have the idea for Republic City? When is Republic City and the idea of this being a separate nation fully, committed on? Is that going to be here? I'm not sure, because again, the focus here is that I think with the setup that they have here, they're coming here to deal with reports probably of the Bender non-Bender conflicts that are happening in the town of Cranefish, that were sort of hinted upon in the Rift with the whole idea of the Bender line and the non-Bender line, and the machinery allowing the non-Benders to sort of keep up with the Benders in terms of the work in the refinery. Maybe it links on from there, but either way, great shot to make it so clear. Like, this is basically a earlier version of one of the opening shots from Korra. It's really nice to get that across. Then we have more talking and seeing what's happening here. And I think what's happening here with Katara talking to Aang is that a plot point from the Rift was that Aang was upset about the fact that basically part of this is actually kind of Sacred Air Temple land. That's the whole Avatar Yang Chen plot, Lady Tianhai and so on from the Rift. And he wasn't particularly happy about even one factory being built on this land. Now he's come back a little bit later, and there's a whole town there, and it's kind of like he has to accept that, the world is kind of moving on, things are getting modern, and he's accepted that. He dealt with that issue and is accepting it. But there's still a sense of, like, Katara here, I think, being, like, aware of, like, are you okay with this, Aang? And he kind of is going to have to accept that. But it seems like those sort of topics are going to be brought back up again. So that's pretty interesting. And I think that's where we ended. Yeah, we get these 5 pages. I think it's 5. No, it's only 4 pages. So next we move on to Team Avatar Tales. I'm assuming, I don't think Greg took a picture of it, but I'm assuming they showed the cover and the date it's coming out on, which is now in March. But then they went into the fact that the other panelist is Sarah Gocher, and she's the artist and I think writer for one of the comics. We knew going in it was a comic about the Toph and the Boulder and the Boulder's cat, and we get a couple of pages from that here. So again, we can't really read the text too much, but we get a sense of her style. It's a little bit more of a cartoony style. We're in the Earth Kingdom here. There's a big screech. It's clearly the cat, the Boulder's cat. Toph is walking around and she hears this and comes in to find the Boulder dealing with his cat. The third page here, Sarah Gocher did put up in full, clean, easy to read version of before the panel, and so we get the dialogue here of just the fact that the Boulder has a cat here called the Pebble, of course, and he's been in the Boulder's life for years, but the cat doesn't really fit his image, so he kind of keeps it a secret. And I think Toph mentions here that it's a croco cat, so it's a half kind of crocodile, half cat, so that's a nice combination. And there's something wrong with it, that's why it's kind of screaming so much. Toph suggests bringing it to the vet, and the Boulder seems to freak out about that the cat doesn't like that at all, and so they're going to have to do something to resolve this. And again, like, from it's hard to tell, of course, because you can't really tell the exact dialogue here. I assume there's maybe another page or two, but Toph ends up kind of doing something. The cat still continues to be a bit of a menace. So, it's a Team Avatar Tales story. It's going to be a simple one, but it was nice to get this little look at least one of the stories. Like the Toph and the Boulder, always a pretty cool combination. One of the notes that Greg told me in terms of the email was that when she was pitching the idea, if she couldn't get this idea, her second idea was a story involving June and her Shirshu Nyla. So that would have been a cool secondary story as well, but this one's cool as well. So I guess you across the idea that she kind of wanted to tell a story of like a human character and an animal. But this is a fun little story. Then they basically go on and just mention Runes of the Empire has been announced. And by all accounts, I don't think Greg mentions anything here in his notes, that they just mentioned that it exists. I don't know if they showed the preview pages for this or not. Again, like, that's where, like, Greg was taking kind of shorthand notes. He was taking them, of course, from the perspective of, like, someone who knows all of this information. So he didn't cover, like, absolutely everything if it was already seen. So that's that. And then the last image I'll just leave on as I kind of go through the rest of the notes is that Michelle Wong, the artist for Runes of the Empire, posted this up recently on Twitter, and it's just some of the line art. She says she's working on Runes of the Empire, And this gets across to me how nice her art is and how much of an improvement this is over Turf Wars. Look how clean everything there is. There's obviously aspects that get across that it's her own style, but it's so accurate. It feels like the characters. It's consistent and super, super, super clean. Which is, I think, the cleanness is kind of like the opposite of what Irene Co's style was. So it's really cool to see that here. And this just image alone to me gets across the strength of this artist. So let's move into some of the other notes that Greg has. Again, like, he took them kind of shorthand note, but by all accounts not a lot happened really in the panel. They just, as I said, like when they were showing off the preview pages for Imbalance, it was just Peter Wortman kind of talking about the process with Brian, how he and Faith Erin Hicks came to kind of work on the project, and so on. Yeah, the art notes, Sarah, when they switched over to the Team Avatar's Tales stuff, mentioned that the backup story was June and the Shearshoe. She was allowed to do her more kind of cartoony style because it was, of course, Team Avatar Tales, where it's a shorter story and so on. And then, by all accounts, after about 10 to 15 minutes into the panel, they went into Q&As. And I think that's a real telling thing about the panel, that they did not have content to fill a whole panel time. They were completely reliant on the audience having questions to ask. And I think, as I'll get into the questions in just a second, the quality of the questions, I think, is telling, because you had no one, for the most part, there to answer the sort of questions I think most fans at a panel like this would want. In terms of, like, who are you asking questions to here? Peter Wortman, the artist of a comic that's not out yet, and we've just in the panel only learned a little bit about. Sarah Goddard, the artist of one short story in a collection of short stories. Like, it's kind of difficult to ask her a question, given that, like, she only worked on this one little story. And then, in that sense, like, you're kind of almost directing most of the questions at the moderator and sort of ignoring the guest. And I think that's sort of telling with the questions that were asked. Just quickly what he says here, Greg, in his notes, someone asked about motion comics and they say no plans. Someone asked for more stories about Sokka. He also notes here at this point, like about 2 questions in, some people bounced at this point, which I think means people just left the panel at this point, like 20 minutes in, basically. Which I think is pretty telling. Like, they don't have anything to say here for the rest of this panel. This was just to show off some of the stuff that's already been announced. Someone brings up, like, the Avatar movie, I think, and the new series and stuff like that. And hoping, like, they bring up, they try to ask a question basically about the live action show from Netflix. And of course, like, it's a comic panel. What are they doing? No one there is involved. There's no questions to be asked here. So I think someone asked a movie question about, like, Korra, and I think they can't answer it again. Someone asked, what are all the panelists' favourite revelations, like big moments from the comics? And by all accounts, the host, the moderator, is the one who answers the question primarily. And then I think Sarah reveals that, like, she hasn't read any of the other comics, which is, like, that's great. And so on. So they talk about how, like, they wanted to respect the show, and that's how they work with the adaptation into a comic. Something about a fan art contest. Someone asks about, will we see Avatar in the comics, avatars after Korra? And they say that they know I think the impression from what Greg says here is that, like, they know that people want to know about other avatars, like the past ones and the future ones. What else do we get here? For Peter, one of the hardest things in the comic was portraying the martial arts skills in the comic. That was one of the more difficult things for him. And yeah, so I think the last question he mentions here is someone asked about an Uncle Iroh prequel comic, and they say nothing planned for at this point in time. On the plus side, I think that's like 3 or 4 panels in a row someone's mentioned the Uncle Iroh idea of a comic about him, prequel, but still nothing planned. So that's the panel. Overall, pretty bad, I think you'd have to say. Like, sure, they showed off some preview pages, but, like, we can't read them. So, and I doubt they even showed them on screen for long enough for the audience to, like, properly read them. and as you can see, with a bunch of people taking pictures and like them not coming out that well, we still don't have the preview pages fully just yet. I assume the Imbalance preview pages will be released by some sort of a news outlet. We'll probably get like potentially seven plus preview pages from like, comic book resources or something like that. We just have to wait a little bit longer for those. But beyond that, like, the whole panel seemed to be just like, hey, we have a new Korra book, here's the next Avatar book, Team Avatar Tales, not mentioning anything about all of the delays or anything like that. And the only thing they really had to go on was basically Peter Wortman going through the art process. And yeah, the fact that loads of people left in the middle of the Q&A, I think is telling, because like, if I was at that panel, the question I would have would be for the moderator. It would be about like what caused all the delays, what's with all the delays and the lack of communication. That would be my question. But that's got nothing to do with Peter Wortman or Sarah Goder. That's directed at the Dark Horse moderator, basically, more than anything. And I doubt they'd even answer that question. So it feels just like that there was a whole lot of nothing to really kind of get across here. And at that point, like, you kind of question, why do they do these panels? Like, what do they get out of doing these panels? Because there's nothing here really for hardcore fans. I think that's the main thing to say. Like, Greg's on the podcast with me. By all accounts, he wasn't overly impressed with the panel. I, watching it from kind of home, wasn't impressed by the panel. And that's in general what I've seen from most people. Lots of disappointment as we went, like, the first 15-20 minutes, not knowing anything. Dark Horse are mentioning nothing about the panel themselves. They're not live tweeting it. I wonder why, because there was no content. And the thing is, going into this one, there was actually potential, because they just talked about the new Korra comic. Like, obviously we'd have to wait and see like what exactly did they say about the Korra comic, but I doubt it was anything that wasn't said in the article. And the point here is just that, like, it's not for hardcore fans, so it's for casual fans. But if all you're doing is just basically saying, here are the next 3 books that are out, is it worth even doing a panel to just tell maybe 100 people that don't know this sort of information that this is the case? Is it really worth it to get a couple of extra sales to do a whole panel and organize all this stuff when you really have nothing to say? Like, they could turn these panels into something much, much more meaningful. Really try and involve the fans, and I think properly get a sense of what the fandom actually wants from the comics. And then I think just address, like, use this as a time to properly communicate to your hardcore fans. Like, I think that would be the best way to go about this, is that address the fact that, for the most part, the people looking for this panel and information out of it are your hardcore fans. So give information, even if it's super in-depth. Give that information. Like, tell us more about, like, what Imbalance is about and so on. It just feels like there was a whole lack of effort gone into this, in that I'm not actually sure. Maybe Greg just didn't feature it, he didn't take a picture of it because it was already revealed, but by all accounts it doesn't seem like they mentioned the Turf Wars hardcover the whole panel, which is weird, in that book is out before Team Avatar Tales, and you'd think, given that that's one of their big successful books, they'd mention it, like, especially with the nice cover that it has, but nothing about it. So yeah, a bit frustrating there. They didn't give any insight into, like, a roadmap going into the future for the comics. Just, again, dismissing most questions that people had about future content and so on. So, another disappointing year. And I think it basically confirms that, like, there's no reason to get particularly excited for these panels anymore. At all. Like, even this year, when they should have had a good panel, they didn't. I think for the most part, I'm not going to be focusing too much anymore on these panels. Of course, I'll still cover them a little bit, but, waiting there on the computer for like an hour or two for information to come out, like, it's really not worth it for what actually comes out. The information is going to come out from news sites, like we got with Runes of the Empire with EW, and like I suspect the Imbalance pages will probably come from, like, maybe EW again, or comic book resources or something like that. If not, Amazon a couple of weeks before release will have the pages and we'll be able to read them properly. But yeah, that's been my thoughts on the NYCC 2018 panel. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on what we've seen of the preview pages, the two different artists, getting to see Peter Wortman's art style properly, I suppose, for the first time in motion. I actually quite like it. Again, it's not Gurihuru. I think it's always going to be difficult to live up to Team Gurihuru, but it's really, really nice. And then I love Michelle Wong's art for the Runes of the Empire. Other than that, I thought it was a very, very, very disappointing panel in that they easily could replace this with just another nicely timed news article type thing. But we'll have to wait and see on that. So yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.